Every week, millions of Americans step around the same problem in their own backyard, and almost nobody sees it as a business. But one company built an entire franchise model around it, and publicly says a single territory averaged more than $234,000 in gross revenue. So here's the question: how does something people joke about become a real recurring revenue business? And what does that tell us about where opportunity actually hides? Picture a quiet suburban street on a Saturday morning. Fresh-cut grass, kids' bikes in the driveway, dogs barking behind fences. On the surface, it looks like ordinary middle-class life. But hidden inside that scene is a tiny recurring problem almost everyone ignores. Not because it's rare, because it's too common, too mundane, too embarrassing to notice as a market. That's usually where people stop looking. And that's exactly why the opportunity survives. Most people think business ideas should feel exciting: software, AI, crypto. Something scalable, glamorous, maybe even a little futuristic. But real markets don't care what feels exciting. They care what gets paid for. And pet ownership is not a niche habit. The American Pet Products Association says U.S. pet industry spending reached $158 billion in 2025, with 95 million U.S. households owning at least one pet. Dog ownership alone rose to 53% of U.S. households, about 71 million homes. Now think about what that really means. Not in the abstract. In physical terms, tens of millions of yards, tens of millions of routines. And inside those routines, a chore that never really gets completed. It resets every day. And that matters, because one-time problems create one-time revenue. But recurring annoyances, those can create subscriptions. That's the mechanism. This is not a business built on passion. It's a business built on recurrence. A homeowner pays not for the scoop itself, but for the removal of a low-grade recurring pain, disgust, guilt, inconvenience, and time. Consumer pricing guides show typical service pricing around $15 to $30 per weekly visit for one dog, $20 to $40 every other week, and $60 to $150 for a one-time cleanup. So the model is simple: small ticket service, repeated often, routed efficiently, and upsold where possible. And once you see it, the economics get clearer. If a route had 100 weekly customers paying, say, $20 each, that's about $2,000 a week, or roughly $104,000 a year in gross revenue, before fuel, labor, insurance, customer acquisition, and taxes. That's a calculation, not a reported average. The deeper point is that this business doesn't win through high prices. It wins through density. The shorter the route, the higher the margin. The more recurring the customer base, the less you have to keep selling from zero. Here's the part most people miss: the product is not cleanup. The product is psychological relief. People do not buy this because they love premium waste management. They buy it because tiny forms of friction are strangely expensive in human behavior. When a task is repetitive, unpleasant, and easy to postpone, demand quietly builds. That's why boring businesses can outperform interesting ones. They serve pain people feel every week, not trends people talk about every month. The business side of that logic is visible in the public material. Duty Calls describes itself as a home-based pet waste removal and odor control business, serving residential yards, apartment complexes, commercial properties, and homeowner associations. The company says owners can earn recurring revenue through residential and commercial contracts, special events, and one-time cleanups. Its site says the average franchisee gross revenue per territory was $234,689 for the 2024 calendar year. It also lists an initial investment of $76,450 to $93,850 for its franchise system. But remember, that is gross revenue, not profit. And that distinction matters, because gross revenue can sound glamorous while real profit depends on route efficiency, labor, local competition, cancellations, vehicle costs, weather, and customer retention. In other words, price is what the customer pays. Value is the problem you remove. Profit is what survives after the route is done. That is the difference between a side hustle that feels busy and a business that actually compounds. There's another insight hiding here too. This kind of business is often powered less by social media than by local intent. When someone searches for a service, they're not browsing for entertainment. They're trying to solve a problem now. Google says that in 2025, it helped drive more than 2.5 billion monthly direct connections at no cost, including phone calls, direction requests, messages, bookings, and reviews. And more than 19.5 million American businesses used Google's free tools to receive those kinds of customer connections. That means the modern version of this business is not just a person with bags and a bucket. It's a person who understands local search as infrastructure. Google Business Profile explicitly markets itself as a way to stand out on search and maps, collect reviews, accept bookings or quote requests, define service areas, and track customer actions like calls, directions, website clicks, messages, and bookings. This is why the idea matters beyond the chore itself. It reveals a broader rule of wealth building. The best small businesses often sell relief, not aspiration. They do not need to look impressive. They need to be useful, repeatable, and easy to discover when the buyer is ready. That's a very different game from chasing virality. One is attention dependent. The other is pain dependent. And pain tends to be more stable than trends. Of course, not every ugly problem is a good business. Some are too small, too seasonal, too low trust, or simply too difficult to route efficiently. And not every dollar of revenue turns into income, let alone wealth. But the underlying behavior is real. The CDC warns that dog poop can carry germs that make people and animals sick, and says cleaning it up helps reduce disease spread. So this isn't just cosmetic inconvenience. There is a real hygiene incentive underneath the emotional one. So the lesson is not start a poop scooping business. The lesson is more valuable than that. Look for recurring problems people are slightly ashamed to talk about, consistently willing to pay to avoid, and unlikely to solve permanently. That is where boring demand lives. And boring demand is often better than exciting demand. Because exciting demand gets crowded. Boring demand gets dismissed. So what was the business idea hiding in plain sight? It wasn't really pet waste. It was recurring inconvenience. The invisible market underneath ordinary life. The little weekly frustrations that people will gladly outsource once someone makes the service simple, trustworthy, and local. That's the real revelation. Wealth often doesn't begin with invention. It begins with noticing what everybody sees, but nobody prices.